Are you free, or do you just think you are? What if everything you believe to be your choice was actually the result of manipulation so subtle that you don't even notice it? Aldous Huxley and George Orwell warned us about something far more dangerous than any violent regime. They talked about a form of control where you don't just accept your condition, but you come to love it. Imagine a slave who polishes his chains every day, who displays them with pride, who violently attacks anyone who suggests removing them. Sounds impossible. Then you need to know the secrets I'm about to reveal. Get ready to discover how to make people love their own prison. This knowledge could be your salvation or your damnation. Aldous Huxley spoke about something he called the ultimate revolution. Unlike all other revolutions in history, this one wouldn't need weapons, prisons, or public executions. It would work directly on people's minds and bodies. For thousands of years, power always depended on brute force. Kings and emperors maintained control through fear, violence, and physical punishment. If you disobeyed, you knew exactly what awaited you: the gallows, the stake, or exile. But Huxley realized we were heading towards something completely different. A form of domination where the controlled person doesn't even realize they're being controlled, where they actively participate in their own submission, defending the system that oppresses them as if it were their own creation. This wasn't science fiction when Huxley wrote about it. It was a trend he saw developing around him, and the worst was yet to come. Advances in psychology, pharmacology, and mass communication techniques were creating tools of mind control that surpassed any torture instrument from the past. The problem with regimes based solely on terror is simple: they don't last. As an old political saying goes, you can do everything with bayonets except sit on them. You can terrorize a population for a period, but eventually people rebel, flee, or simply stop functioning productively. Every lasting system needs something more powerful than fear. It needs genuine consent. The question that tormented political thinkers was, how do you obtain this consent without constantly resorting to violence? The answer lay in psychology. If you could shape people's minds from early on, if you could influence their fears, their desires, and their aspirations, you wouldn't need to force them to do anything anymore. They would do everything of their own free will, believing they were following their own impulses. But Huxley went beyond this insight. He envisioned the pinnacle of human manipulation, a system where people wouldn't just consent to their own domination, but would come to love it. Remember those polished chains I mentioned at the beginning? Now imagine that the slave doesn't just love them, but sincerely believes they're his only protection against the hostile world out there. That without them, he would be lost, vulnerable, incomplete. That was the ultimate goal Huxley identified. Huxley used the word malevolent to describe this form of revolution because it attacked the very essence of what makes us human, our capacity for free and conscious choice. It transformed our greatest virtue, the capacity to love, into our greatest weakness. And here comes the question that should keep you awake at night. Are you sure your passions are really yours? The scientific foundation for this type of mind control was discovered by Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov. His experiments revealed something disturbing about how the mind works under extreme stress. When an organism was subjected to intense psychological pressure, its mental resistance simply crumbled. Pavlov discovered that in states of maximum stress, the mind becomes extraordinarily vulnerable to suggestion. Any idea implanted at this critical moment becomes deeply embedded in the psyche, making it almost impossible to remove later. It's as if the brain, overloaded, drops all its defenses. What's most impressive is that religious and political leaders had been using this technique intuitively for centuries, long before Pavlov scientifically explained how it worked. Think about the great religious revivals in history. Preachers didn't choose random times for their sermons. They waited for moments of social crisis, famine, war, or epidemic. When people were emotionally broken, it was the perfect moment. The technique was always the same. First, you generate as much psychological stress as possible. You talk about imminent dangers, terrible threats, catastrophic consequences. You push the person to the limit of their mental resistance. And then at the exact moment when they're about to break, you offer relief. This relief doesn't come alone. It comes accompanied by a specific solution, a particular ideology, a determined way of seeing the world. The person, desperate to escape psychological torment, accepts everything without question. And more than that, they develop deep gratitude toward whoever offered them salvation. Medieval preachers were masters of this art. They spent hours describing the horrors of hell in vivid and terrifying detail. When the audience was in complete despair, terrorized about their eternal fate, the preacher offered salvation through the church. The conversion wasn't just intellectual, it was emotional, visceral, almost physical. This same technique was adapted for the modern political context with devastating results. Authoritarian leaders learn to create artificial crises and then present themselves as saviors. They generate the problem and then sell the solution. But this is just the beginning. When you combine terror with psychological techniques of acceptance, something extraordinary happens in the human mind. Even under brutal oppression, the individual can develop a perverse form of affection for their oppressor. This goes far beyond simple obedience through fear. Psychologists identified this phenomenon in extreme situations and gave it the name Stockholm Syndrome. But what few realize is that this doesn't just happen in kidnappings or extreme situations. This dynamic can be reproduced in entire societies. The secret lies in alternating periods of pressure with moments of relative relief. Gradually, the victim stops resisting and begins to anticipate moments of relief as if they were gifts from the oppressor. Over time, this gratitude transforms into something deeper. The victim begins to rationalize their situation, finding reasons to justify the oppressor's behavior. They develop an emotional identification with their captives, defending them against external criticism. At the social level, this manifests as entire populations defending regimes that clearly act against their interests. They don't just tolerate oppression, they celebrate it. But there's an alternative to direct terror that's even more effective: nonviolent mind control techniques. Suggestion, hypnosis, and subtle forms of psychological manipulation that operate below the threshold of normal consciousness. Studies revealed something fascinating about the distribution of human vulnerability to these techniques. Approximately 20% of the population is highly suggestible. These people respond quickly to hypnosis, propaganda, and social influence. Another 20% are almost completely immune to these methods. The rest of the population falls somewhere in the middle. This statistic is absolutely crucial for understanding how human masses can be shaped and controlled. You don't need to convince everyone. You just need to focus on the most vulnerable 20% and use them to influence the middle ground. The highly suggestible become your natural evangelists. They don't just accept your ideas, they propagate them with genuine fervor. They do the conversion work for you. One of the most revealing experiments about the power of suggestion involved morphine and distilled water. Patients received injections of distilled water, but were told they were receiving morphine for pain. Surprisingly, many of them experienced real pain relief, indistinguishable from the effect of real morphine. This demonstrates that the human mind can produce real physical effects based solely on belief. If you can implant the right belief in someone's mind, you can literally alter their physical reality. For the skilled manipulator, knowing who responds to social placebo is a weapon of immense power. These people become natural amplifiers of any message you want to spread. And this is only half the story. From a political standpoint, controlling the most suggestible 20% of the population is enough to change governments and rewrite entire societies. These individuals form a core of fanatical support, capable of influencing elections, social movements, and even revolutions. Adolf Hitler understood this dynamic better than any leader of his era. He discovered that physically fatigued and mentally exhausted people were much more susceptible to suggestion. That's why his rallies were organized at specific times and lasted for hours on end. He scheduled his events for the end of the day when people were already tired from work. He kept them standing for long periods, subjected to loud music, intense lights, and heat. When he finally took the stage, the audience was in an altered state of consciousness, ready to absorb any message. The constant repetition of simple phrases combined with dramatic gestures and calculated pauses created an almost hypnotic effect. People left these events completely transformed, carrying not just new ideas but new feelings about themselves and their place in the world. Modern technology has multiplied this power exponentially. An ancient demagogue could speak to a few hundred, or at most a few thousand people at once. Their modern successors speak instantly to millions through radio, television, and the internet. This technological amplification doesn't just increase reach, it intensifies the psychological effect. The human voice, when electronically amplified, gains an almost supernatural quality. It penetrates not just the ears, but seems to vibrate directly in the person's nervous center. Moving images have an even greater hypnotic power. Television and cinema can literally alter the viewer's brainwave patterns, inducing states ranging from deep relaxation to extreme agitation. But the internet has taken this to a completely new level. Today, algorithms know more about you than your best friend. Now, propaganda can be personalized for each individual based on their specific fears, particular desires, and unique vulnerabilities. Algorithms analyze your behavior and deliver exactly the type of content you're most likely to accept and share. The result? We live in customized information bubbles where each person receives a slightly different version of reality, and we don't even notice. Whoever possesses such powerful tools of mental manipulation will inevitably be tempted to abuse them. This isn't a question of individual morality. It's an almost physical law of human nature. Power corrupts, and absolute power over human minds corrupts absolutely. The central moral question isn't whether these techniques will be used, but how we can structure our society to limit the temptations of those who control them. How can we create safeguards that protect our mental autonomy even when it's under sophisticated attack? The traditional answer has been democracy and separation of powers, but these institutions were created to deal with more primitive forms of power abuse. They may not be adequate to face mind manipulation technologies that operate below the radar of normal consciousness. The most subtle danger comes when regimes apply mind control techniques under the pretext of protecting or educating the population. They present manipulation as medicine, propaganda as education, and control as paternal care. This moral makeup makes abuse much harder to detect and resist. When someone says they're doing something for your own good, how do you argue against it? How do you prove you're being manipulated when the manipulator claims to be just trying to help you? We see this today in multiple forms. Campaigns that use propaganda techniques to modify behaviors, programs that implant specific ideologies under the guise of education, and policies that constantly expand surveillance and control powers. The pattern is always the same. Identify a real problem. Propose a solution that requires greater control over people. Implement this solution with promises that it will be temporary and limited, and then gradually expand it until control becomes permanent and total. The genius of this method lies in how it co-opts our own goodness against us. George Orwell painted the darkest picture of what this process could become. In 1984, he described a society where the state had managed to completely eliminate natural human emotions, sexuality, family loyalties, and even intellectual curiosity. In Orwell's world, these fundamental human characteristics were replaced by absolute devotion to the political party. People didn't just obey, they loved their obedience. They found meaning and purpose only in serving the system that had stripped them of everything that made them human. The most powerful image in the book is the boot stomping on the human face forever. Not a boot that steps once and then moves away, but one that remains there forever, crushing any attempt to lift your head, to breathe freely, to see beyond the ground. Orwell wasn't writing science fiction. He was extrapolating trends he saw developing around him. He observed how governments were learning to use technology and psychology to penetrate ever more deeply into the private and mental lives of their citizens. What haunted him most was the possibility that people wouldn't just tolerate this invasion, but would come to desire it. Today, we face exactly the question that worried Orwell. Where is the line between legitimate measures for society's good and control mechanisms that become ends in themselves? How do we distinguish between genuine protection and disguised domination? The answer isn't simple, because the same methods can be used both to help and to control. The difference often lies in the intention of those applying these techniques and the limits they voluntarily impose on themselves. But here's the problem. Who defines what is society's good? Who decides which behaviors need to be modified? Who determines when an emergency is serious enough to justify exceptional measures? And most importantly, Who watches the watchers? History teaches us that temporary power has a strange tendency to become permanent. Emergency measures are rarely completely reversed. Each crisis leaves behind new precedents, new authorities, new control mechanisms that remain dormant until the next opportunity for use, and perhaps the most disturbing question of all. If these techniques really work to modify harmful behaviors, why not use them? The defense of human freedom doesn't begin with grand heroic gestures or public demonstrations. It begins at the most basic level, with each individual taking responsibility to protect their own mind against manipulation. This means developing healthy skepticism toward messages that appeal primarily to emotions. It means questioning information that confirms exactly what you already believe. It means seeking diverse sources of information, especially those that make you feel uncomfortable. It means recognizing that your mind isn't an impenetrable fortress, but a vulnerable system that can be hacked by people who understand how it works. It means accepting that even your deepest convictions may have been implanted by others. Above all, it means never stopping asking questions. The moment you stop questioning, the moment you accept that certain ideas are beyond debate, is the moment you hand over your mind for others to control. Mental freedom is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it regularly, it atrophies. If you always agree with the crowd, always accept the official version, always choose the path of least resistance, you gradually lose the ability to think independently. Don't let this happen. The responsibility is yours. You are the only guardian of your own mind, the only protector of your capacity for free choice. No one else can do this for you. The future of human freedom will be decided by millions of ordinary individuals making daily choices about how to use their minds. It will be decided by you. Start exercising your critical thinking today. Question the news you read, the ads you see, the politicians who speak in your name. Always ask who benefits if I believe this. What emotion are they trying to awaken in me? Why do they want me to feel this now? And when you look in the mirror tomorrow morning, ask yourself the question that could change everything. Are these polished chains I carry mine or someone else's? The worst prison is the one you defend, and the worst slavery is the one you call freedom. If this video shattered some comfortable illusion in your mind, if it planted a seed of doubt, you can no longer ignore, then subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because the war for your mind has already begun, and you need to decide which side you're on. To help you, I've prepared exclusive material here for the channel with symbolic value. Check it out in the first pinned comment. See you in the next video.